It's the pre-market ritual you never knew you needed. Get ready to gap and go with the Kalim Trading Institute.
Guys, welcome to another episode of Gap and Go. Um, where do I begin? A lot of controversy happening, especially coming from the weakness in the dollar. I think that has persisted. You look at economic data, consumer confidence came in above expectations, sitting at 98 after coming three, four selected straight months of decline. You're looking at PMI sitting at 48, also very weak. Job market still relatively healthy. I think the consumer and the job is still relatively healthy, and that's what's really buoying the market. Jason, maybe you can share your thoughts on macro and maybe give everybody an idea about the taco trade.
Well, I think as you said, no, we're in this gray area. It's parang what's gonna happen next in the cycle, diba? And I mean, I think we've been in this ping pong, changing of narratives for the past few years naman, diba? And I think it's still the same, right? So a lot of people are saying, okay, what's next? Stagflation, recession, hard landing, And I guess you mix in pa the Trump and his policies, diba? It's really quite a confusing environment. And I think right now I'm just trying to listen to what the market's saying. Diba? And I think that maybe one clue as to what's gonna happen next is really the dollar. Parang may unusual weakness right over there. Diba? I'm pretty sure it's also geopolitics. It's because of Trump. Diba? But then again, if you've seen what's been happening, diba? Kaya nauso yung meme na taco Trump eh. Diba? It's that, okay, every time there's a negative market reaction, Trump walks back on his threats eh, diba? So I think it's been quite a difficult environment on that front eh.
Okay, maybe I should just add and give people context also. In April, Liberation Day, on average, the US approximately does 100 to 110 billion dollars in ETF inflow, which includes equities and bonds every single month. Okay. In April, it was actually the lowest month over the last 12, I mean, for a long, long period of time. Only 40 billion ETF inflows happened in the month of April. Okay. Where did the rest of the inflow go? The biggest winner actually was Asia, and Asia was $47 billion in inflow in the month of April. May, okay, the surprising part, despite all the concerns with Trump policy, Asia was negative. Okay, so it actually reversed some of that inflow, but it's not, I think it was like negative $5 billion in equity outflow in the month of May, right? US in the month of May, $80 billion. So there's this, I mean, that's the reason why the taco trade maybe was invented, because there's money coming in into the system every single month. Where does it go? And this has been the dilemma for every asset manager. And we can talk about Donald Trump saying this and that, where do we really flip-flopping on tariffs and whatsoever. But as a fund manager, or for example, like the pension funds and whatsoever, where do I put my money? At the end of the day, it's still the US, right?
Okay.
Last month, siguro, sige, lipat muna tayo sa China, diba? Or Euro, sige, Euro, diba? And then next month, alam mo, wala na tayong magagawa eh. We still have to pour money into the equity and bond market in the US, and that's what happened in the month of May. It looks like June, that's the same story. And maybe I think that's the reason why people are shrugging off all the comments and suggestions being done by President Trump, right? Because they all think that anyway, they're just going to kick it down the road. We don't see any systemic risk, and we'll just keep on, putting more money. That's the reason why I guess the markets have been channeling and chugging along, and really nothing volatile happening both from the equity or the bond market over the last couple of weeks, diba? So I think that's the narrative that the markets are pricing in. Well, whether it's right or wrong, obviously, is a different question. But we always argue about whether markets are expensive or fairly valued, right? It's always teeter-tottering behind kung mahal or it's fairly valued. But I really believe that at the end of the day, unless there's systemic risk, we can see this continue to channel, and that's exactly what's happening today, right? A lot of expectations might have dropped. I mean, we could probably see a lot worse expectations in the next 6 months. I'm not discounting that, but I'm just saying that unless we see something surprising, it looks like whatever happening on the asset manager side on the inflow is still look like we're just gonna keep on putting money into the stock market and into the bond market.
I think also parang big picture view in all this is that, the market is always a disciplining factor. Like, okay, you're powerful, but the market is like, I'm the boss, you know. And like if you do something drastic, diba, the market lets you know its reaction, diba, and forces you to step back. Diba? So I think that's essentially it. Parang if you look at Trump, I think the more moderate advisors are winning out, And that's why I think that the trade wars going forward, parang tingin ko is gonna recede to the background eh. Parang they're gonna try to blunt the, more negative, not make it so extreme. Diba? So parang tingin ko the market's going back to the fundamentals talaga. I mean, and then like going forward, diba? So yeah, I think most important zero earnings, right? Second half of the year.
Yeah, and let's give this outflow in the dollar. We always talk about the outflow in dollar, right? Where is it gonna flow into? The answer is it's not enough in Bitcoin. It's not enough also in gold. So what's Bitcoin? $2 trillion. Gold, maybe $30 trillion. So I guess the market is saying there's not enough money. So we can keep on putting money outside the dollar into these safe haven assets. But at the end of the day, where else do we put our money? And I think that's the dilemma. That's the reason why equity markets in the US continue to outperform. Because at the end of the day, wala eh. Dollar pa rin eh, diba?
I think yung another important development, diba, yung big beautiful bill, right? Which is, I think next, it's in the Congress and Senate na before it's gonna be passed. And parang if you look at it talaga, it's matawag dun? Fiscal stimulus right? So parang the plan is now to, yes, we know that we have a debt problem, fiscal problem, but we're gonna try to outgrow it, aka outspend it. And syempre, that is good for stocks, right?
Yeah. Okay. Brian, I'm sure we've seen a lot of things also move in the short term. Might be priced in the short term, but relatively big moves happening, right? You can talk about uranium. You can talk about your quantum computing, your QBTS. You can talk about your even AI stories, even CRWV, right? Big moves happening across the board. Any thoughts? I mean, how do we participate? Or we are participating, just
I think we really just have to stick with the winners. I think the market now with this V rally coming up is really picking the winners. So from the issues that you said, yan yung mga QBTS, quantum computing, yan yung winners natin, yung mga data centers also. So I guess if you're screening the issues that you like, you just have to look at these sectors. A lot of positive news flow, especially on the alternative power from those things that power data centers, diba? Like yesterday, Meta choosing CEG to power their data centers in the future. So yeah, really just have to stick with this winners. I think that's as easy as it can be, diba? Kasi again, from April 2, diba, I never thought this one would go through a V shape, but for the last 15 collapses of the market, 14 have gone through a V-shaped rally. I think the one that didn't do a V-shaped rally was 2022, diba, yung Jackson Hole. So I guess the probability is pointing to a V-shaped rally all the time.
And that's what I, that's what,
Yeah.
that's the irony of everything, right? And this goes back to, if you look at emerging market, let's be honest, rarely, hindi nag-V-shape rally ang emerging market, right? It's always the US that goes the V-shape rally. And I think it does make sense because at the end of the day, it's the most diverse, it's the most investable market globally. And all asset managers everywhere in the world, if there's one market that you have to buy, it's the US and it cannot collapse. So, I mean, it's still leading in terms of technology, innovation, and earnings per share. So that's the reason why every time you have a drop, we can argue about, hey, we're fairly valued or we're expensive. But at the end of the day, it's only the Mag 7 that's growing at 16-17% on average for a big company, and you won't find that anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I think it's the term is inelastic demand. So the US equities have become so much inelastic. The demand for equities has in the US has become so much inelastic, meaning just buy at any price. This is because of the indexing, di ba? So every year, because of indexing, you just buy the
Correct.
Mag 7 at any price. And the more they become bigger, the more they become inelastic because they're part of the index.
Correct.
Kaya every year na lang, kahit bumagsak yan, kahit anong presyo, bibili nila. Although, what's difficult is, yung news flow kasi is very, talaga, if it gets to you, no, yung mga news flow na makes you emotional or all those things.
Let's be honest, because if you're not scared in emerging market on the news flow, patay ka na eh.
Oh,
Diba?
actually. That's
Diba?
also.
So, I mean, it works in emerging market, let's be honest, yes, diba? But just, just be wary of all these nuances that happen globally.
Yeah. But still, the first principle still holds like what you based on your lecture the past 2 weeks, diba? Last 2 weeks. Yeah. First principle is still the company has to be a revenue grower at the start. At
And
least.
earnings, both.
Oh. So if you want your issue to trend higher, go through a trend phase, the revenue growth has to be going up at the very least.
Okay, let's talk about this really quick. I'll pass this on to Jason. Precious metals, we talked about it a bit, including safe haven assets like Bitcoin have been outperforming. The question is, where does this stop? 3,600, 5,000. I mean, Jason, maybe you can at least. Let me just be clear. So, I think Jason is more inclined to talk about these. I'm in the Warren Buffett camp where, as long as anything doesn't produce yield, it's very difficult for me to invest. But it's nothing. I think what we're just trying to point out is that we really have to understand what is going on, right? So I think Jason is probably in a better position to talk about precious metals than I am.
Right. I think kasi parang when you go back to precious metals, diba, you have to think about fiat money. Diba? I think that when you look at the money all around the world, all of it is like fiat money, meaning there's nothing physical backing all the money in the world.
Mhm.
It's all the trust in the government and in their ability to pay. Diba? And I guess like what's happening in not just today, but in the past 10 years or so, diba, is that I think that the trust, diba, in fiat money has slowly been eroding. Diba? And like today, we're in this sort of inflationary environment. Diba? And if you look at all the governments of the world also, parang they discovered this fiscal pump. Ever since the COVID came, they discovered how powerful it is to spend money to stimulate the economy. Diba? Then you had the Russia-Ukraine wars, diba, where the reserves of Russia were like confiscated, right? So parang you think, okay, these are my assets, may money, pero hindi pala, right? Because at the end of the day, you're buying US treasuries, diba? And what are bonds, diba? Bonds, diba, the value of bond is like depending on the creditor, if he wants to pay you or not, the borrower, debtor pala, right? Whether he wants to pay you or not, eh. Diba? So I think that parang treasuries, hindi na siya, it's not a neutral asset, eh. Like, okay, it's got the name of the US is on it, diba? But gold, I mean, gold is gold. So I guess like there's this parang diversification of people. Instead of like putting all your eggs in dollars and US treasuries, let's allocate a little bit to these metals. So parang to me, in a nutshell, that's basically what's driving this.
Yep, I agree. The physical gold or the miners? What's the
Uh, Ako
or
actually believe in both, eh. But I think when you look at the miners, really, really cheap, low valuation, parang if you look at the margins nila, yung price versus their all-in cost,
yeah?
sobrang laki ng margin. I think it's near all-time highs, eh.
And usually there's a multiplier effect that happens for the miners because tubong lugaw na yan eh. Diba? Diretso na sa bottom line yun eh.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh. So once you get past your fixed cost, diba, operating leverage yan, eh.
That's the reason why mining is in the Philippines. Billion-dollar expansion by Silangan. Mining is back in the Philippines, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Last things about precious metals before we go into EMs and
But I think yung aside from precious metals, no, I think all the metals have been actually been going up mostly. And parang tingin ko kasi parang there's this movement in around the world, eh, about where you lose trust in supply chains because of trade wars, deglobalization. So parang sinasabi nila, countries might be like inclined to stockpile these critical materials, eh, diba? And I also think that yung fiscal is everyone's spending a lot of money, like Europe, diba? They finally decided to, bring up the fiscal deficit, spend on defense. So that needs a lot of materials, right?
okay. So one of the markets that I really believe the funny part is where we're going to see continuous inflow because of the weakness in the dollar is China, in my opinion. And we talked about it many times already. Valuations a lot cheaper. If you had to think about growth and where the expansion is, very competitive also in that space. So China obviously is still weaker economically. I think manufacturing also came in relatively weak. Deflationary to some extent. Cost of living, cheap, employment still a concern. Yields still sitting at what's this? 20-year lows. Sorry, forever lows. And this is the thing, and I feel like China is still very stimulative in this category. It doesn't mean it's gonna take time. I do agree it is. But I really believe that inflows will start picking up again after a outflow that happened in the month of May. We're still watching and seeing on this end. A lot of interesting stories also. I mean, we can talk about CRWV going up because eventually they're going to be included in the S&P. I think you're going to see companies, for example, like Catel, the largest battery, which is 1 trillion Hong Kong dollars in market cap, also be included just because of its sheer size. So I'm fairly positive actually in Hong Kong and China. I like what's happening. I think this will also start channeling higher, in my opinion. But we'll see. Any other thoughts on Hong Kong? Or
For me, I'm looking at Hong Kong, the domestic consumer story, like, because I can't if I'm expecting the dollar to fall, and parang the exporters will be, I think, tamaan yun eh. But the local businesses should do well, especially for a surplus country like China, and rates are very low. So if you look at your 325, yung mga consumer retail issues that are 90% local, diba? Yung milk tea nila, what's that? 2097 ba? Mixue ba yun?
Ishiye.
Miche. Yan, Pop Mart. So all these things. You can see it naman they're outperforming the local ones, retail ones. Well, that's at least that's what I'm looking at in the and even Alibaba Pictures. Forgot what tickers. Alibaba Pictures.
I forgot the.
Oh, I forgot. Ano ba yan? Yan, 1060. Yan. So these are local local revenues yan doing well also. Expect to do well.
Ano to, Mission Impossible?
Ano yan? Ticketing. Ticketing, 70% of the business is ticketing sales. So I think they'll be aside from the production of movies.
Yeah. I think just one point to share to everyone here. Making money in the tech because margins are very well, the government also doesn't allow these companies to make as much money as they can, right? So, I mean, case in point, you have companies in US making 30, 40% net margins, right? It's close to impossible to happen in a country like Hong Kong. In China. But your consumer companies are actually still very healthy. I think that's the point of what Brian was talking about. Miche, maybe not, but let's say companies like Pop Mart and Blocks, these are toy companies, right? That's still able to generate 70% gross margins and have 30, 40% net. So very rare, but I think that's the reason why these guys have been outperforming in recent period. Okay, let's move on to Philippines really quick. May pag-asa na ba? I mean, siguro, let's talk about some significant news that happened. First is the drop in stock transaction tax from 0.6 to 0.1%. I'm not sure what the effectivity date is. I think it's 15 to 90 days on the signing, which happened a few days ago. My opinion, I think this is a big deal. And I think it should boost liquidity and volume kahit papaano. But a lot of good signs, in my opinion, that has been happening. You know, we talk about buying companies with yield, getting paid to wait, because most companies are cheap. And it looks like, some significant news that happened over the course of last week. We've seen RRHI buy back 23 billion pesos worth at 50 pesos per share, which is 20% above market price. You see it with FGEN, 50 billion in purchased by Ricky Rason, diba? From Prime Infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying it's going to go up. I think it's just, it's good because, if you're buying cheap and getting paid to wait, it's all obviously paying out dividends through its share price. And I think that still remains the narrative. Buying all these good quality companies, get paid to wait, and hopefully over time, you get compensated with higher share prices. Because that's the thing, growth hasn't been great, let's be honest, right? I mean, if you're buying companies for growth, you might as well go outside in the US to buy growth. Very few companies in the Philippines are actually growing. But I think the point here is that a lot of things are very much discounted and the yields are still attractive. And that looks like it's still going to be the main investment thesis for buying Philippine stocks. Bonus na lang yung mga kung aakit pa to, hindi.
Yeah.
Another significant news, Hotel 101. You guys have anything? $2 billion SPAC?
Reset Yeah, I think if you're looking, especially in Philippine companies, most of them are marami ngayon value, diba? I think if you're buying value with dividends, especially let's say tepid growth lang, I think the price action should correspond. Like for example, a URC that wala naman obvious gangbuster growth, diba? But it corresponds that the strategy should be mean reversion because mura siya. I think if it's a high growth company like a plus, for example, if it's like that, kailangan the expectation should be trending. But for things like pag value lang and no growth, I think the strategy should be mean reversion. Like for now, ano ba, Wilcon, not expecting any growth in the next, 2 quarters, but value is cheap. So the corresponding strategy should be mean reversion. At least the expectation is this one reverts to 200-day. Bloomberg. So like
Ganun din eh.
oh.
I agree. Because then the next phase after this mean reversion is, will it now reverse business?
Yes.
Will it now start to grow after this? That's the next question mark.
Yes.
These guys.
Above the 200-day, you should expect growth, which I think the narrative is online gaming. Ano? Fanalo ba yun? So you can match the expectation, the price action.
Okay, let's just talk about online gaming for a bit. Because I saw the report of CLSA and they had 109 peso price target on DigiPlus, right? And if I look at it from a valuation and cash flow perspective, it's reasonable based on how fast it's growing. It's nothing because valuations of DigiPlus aren't actually expensive, even how much it's gone up because of how fast it's also growing. Right? What has surprised me in some of the data that they showed was that 7.5, I repeat, 7.5 million monthly active users on their platform.
Monthly active users.
I don't get it. Like 7.5 million Filipinos.
At least 2 months, ano? Diba? At least
Dami nun ah.
Once a month. That's ridiculous. I mean, there's like 45 million on 40 million the workforce, right? So 20% of the workforce, 1 out of 5 people is on a DigiPlus platform. And this is like shocking to me. And I think the target for CLSA was that it's going to grow into 15 million monthly active users. I'm like, I don't know, but these are like society concerns for me more than anything else. That we've come to 20% of the 20% of the working force speculating once a month, which is, I don't want to say anything. It is, I guess, that's the reason why Bancor revenues is expected to hit 480 billion this 2025, which is 20+% above last year, which did 400 billion in revenues last year. So
definitely there's social destruction. If that's what you want to say.
Sana linagay na lang sa PSE, di lumipad na lahat, diba?
I
Yeah.
think that's
Ako may comment ko, I just don't like also gambling, anything that's bad for society. I think there's very real risks, di ba, participating in those kind of stocks.
yeah, the access. I think the issue is the access to it and
But
yung
syempre, hindsight na umakit hanggang 50 plus, di ba?
the very least kasi pag physical casino, there's effort to go there. But if it's digital, it's on your phone. The issue is kids might be able to access it eventually. Tapos 10 pesos lang you can allocate 10 pesos each month.
Well, I guess we're wait and seeing on this end. I think that's just what we see from the gambling end. Other notables that have been going up, I think we're gonna have FTSE rebalancing by June 20. JG with the biggest inflow. I think it's also the reason why it started going up 3 weeks ago, plus the petrochem closure. We've seen Wilgon and Bloomberg get deleted last week. Significant outflow that's supposed to happen next week is Monday. Plus also has some Mega World, I think SM also, but relatively nothing really concerning on the outflow for next Friday. Okay, last things, guys. Nine.
Dollar weakness should favor emerging markets, especially non-exporting ones like Philippines.
Oh, still wait and see on that end. I think the good part is like this narrative about cutting interest rates because currencies in EM are weak. It's still in play. Looks like that's still going to be why we think there might be continuous outflow happening. Um, continuous inflow happening in Asia. I just don't know if it's going to happen in the Philippines. Oh, just to context, on the $40 billion that went to Asia, a whopping $7.5 million went to the Philippines.
Wow.
So anyway,
Top of mind, parang top of mind tayo.
so there's a $40 billion inflow that happened in April, wala pa rin nangyari sa Philippines. Okay. So I think we're hopeful that transaction tax might boost liquidity. I think in the US it's still going to be the same story where at the end of the day, everybody still needs to be invested in the US, regardless of whatever Trump rhetoric statements that he'll be making. Also, the reason why we think that this V-shaped rally in the US might still continue. Nonetheless, our focus has always been the leaders. I think Brian has also been clear on that. You've had your cloud computing, you've had your uranium, you've had companies like CRWV on AI still outperform the market. And most likely your Mag 7 will continue to channel. Hong Kong, I'm maybe the only person here, but I'm more positive also in Hong Kong. I think there's still might going to be more investable flows that will happen in Asia, and that will largely lead to a stronger China and Hong Kong market. And last but not the least is the Philippines. We've actually seen that positive end happen on local flows. Our story has been the same. Buy cheap, invest in yield, and be patient and just keep your expectations in check. Kung dumating, okay. Kung wala, at least you get paid, right? And looks like that's going to be the same story for the rest of the year. Now, with regards to systemic risk, I don't think we see anything surprising happen so far. Jason talked about the 2.5 trillion big bill spending in the US, but we'll cover it on another day. And hopefully we get more details on that, so at least we have a better idea on which economic direction we're going to be seeing for the US, especially with how they plan to finance that entire big spending bill. All right. So with that, thanks guys, and I'll see you guys next week. 2 weeks from now. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.